In a corner of the galaxy that even cartographers avoided out of sheer boredom, something incredibly stupid was about to happen. Clubo 3 was a world so peaceful, so mind-numbingly calm, that even its tectonic plates moved out of sheer politeness. Its skies were the exact same shade of lilac every single day, its oceans murmured compliments to passing seagulls, and the most dangerous predator was a fruit that occasionally fell from trees with a mildly accusatory plop. The inhabitants, small bouncy beings called Yibbles, were known for three things: their impossibly squeaky voices, their complete lack of conflict, and their overwhelming passion for municipal efficiency. The capital, Flan, had once spent 6 weeks debating whether their street lamps were too emotionally intrusive. The conclusion: dimmer settings and an official apology to nocturnal insects. Violence didn't exist. Anger only used as a seasoning in metaphors. Physical exercise? Largely theoretical and often confused with jazz appreciation. Yibble society operated like a finely tuned, solar-powered accordion, beautiful, pointless, and ever so slightly annoying. Then, one entirely unremarkable day, a rectangular object fell from the sky. It didn't crash. It didn't blaze through the atmosphere in a majestic display. It landed, gently, like a soufflé, or a misdelivered parcel. The object was long, metallic, and confusingly confident in shape. On the side, in peeling Earth Standard English, it read, "Property of Bronson's Gym and Tactical Fitness. If found, please return or start lunges immediately." The Yibbles, being naturally curious and terminally optimistic, gathered around it with the same energy one might bring to watching wet paint flirt with dryness. "Is it art?" asked Glibbo, head of the Department of Symbolic Landscaping. "I think it's a vending machine for pain," offered Professor Plump, whose title was entirely ceremonial and whose degree had been printed on recycled napkins. After 20 minutes of debate, 2 days of meditation, and one unfortunate incident involving a resistance band and an ambitious Yibble named Clan, the object opened. Inside was a gym. No, not just a gym. A full-on, sweat-smelling, testosterone-tinted temple of human physical overcompensation. Dumbbells, benches, rows of cables. A rowing machine that seemed vaguely malevolent, and of course the sign, "No pain, no gain." The Yibbles read it, then read it again, then had to hold an emergency summit because pain was a word outlawed in 6 districts and banned from crossword puzzles altogether. But something happened, something deeply regrettable. Blort, a particularly squishy Yibble with the attention span of a buttered paperclip, wandered inside the gym, sat on what he believed was a thinking bench, and accidentally curled a 5-pound dumbbell. His arm bulged, visibly. The gasps could be heard in 3 adjacent dimensions. "His flab is less flabby," cried a horrified witness. Blort flexed. Something popped, possibly his dignity. But for a fleeting moment, he felt something no Yibble had ever felt before. Accomplishment. "Do it again," someone screamed. "Make the wobble strong," yelled another. And thus began the downfall of tranquility. The gym had awoken something primal, not violence, not rage, but ambition, a thirst for more strength, more repetition, more confusing grunts followed by poorly executed stretches. The Yibbles didn't have war, but now they had training montages. And for the first time in recorded Yibble history, a citizen was heard shouting the unthinkable, "One more rep!" What followed would leave Clubo 3 forever changed. The gym hadn't just been misplaced. It had been catastrophically rerouted. Somewhere in the galaxy, a poor, over-caffeinated logistics intern named Fwibble was weeping into a customer complaint titled, "Why is there a planet bench-pressing its own moon?" But Clubo 3 didn't care. The gym was now theirs. It was worshipped, feared, and regularly polished by a group of Yibbles who called themselves the disciples of DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. No one knew what it meant, but it sounded vaguely prophetic. Meanwhile, back on the orbital relay station, Parcellus Maximus, the human responsible for the delivery mishap, was dealing with a crisis of their own. Not ethical, not emotional, legal. A certain gym franchise licensing agent named Brenda Meeks had just realized that Earth's most aggressive gym package, codenamed Hank Flex Plus Max Edition, was not on planet Svalcor Prime, where it was supposed to motivate retired space marines into cardio. It was somewhere else. Brenda did what any human in deep administrative panic would do. She filed a formal report, misclicked Send to Manager, and then went on lunch break. Down on Clubo 3, however, things were moving fast. Too fast. Blort had biceps now, real ones, veiny, slightly uneven, and entirely unearned. The Yibbles, inspired by his transformation, started mimicking his every move, but with no understanding of anatomy, mechanics, or why one should never attempt a squat while upside down. The results were spectacularly chaotic. Entire neighborhoods were converted into makeshift gym zones. Grass fields were trampled into inspirational zones of sweat. Parks were redesigned as flexing arenas. The elderly began lifting benches, not from benches, actual public benches. One 92-year-old Yibble was seen curling a mailbox while muttering, "Feel the burn," and frightening several pigeons into therapy. And then, of course, came the inevitable competition. It started innocently. Who could hold a plank the longest? Who could yell, "No pain, no gain," with the most intimidating squeak? Who could lift the ceremonial orb of discipline without pulling a hamstring? But Yibbles had never competed before. They didn't know about limits, or consequences, or insurance policies. So during the second annual Blort-Off, where Yibbles flexed at each other until someone blinked, a terrible thing happened. Uglan, remember him? The one tangled in resistance bands, looked Blort directly in the eye and said, "You call that a forearm? My grandma curls kettlebells with her eyelids." Gasps! So many gasps! Insults were a novelty. That one was legendary. Blort didn't respond. At first, then, ever so slowly, he dropped his weights, cracked his knuckles, and said something that would go down in Yibble history as the first official threat. "Meet me at the squat rack." Dusk. The crowd erupted in confusion. Was dusk a time, a metaphor, a type of protein shake? Didn't matter, the duel was on. And Clubo 3, once the galaxy's safest and most emotionally balanced planet, had its first rivalry. Not war, not yet, but rivalry is just war in spandex. The duel between Blort and Klarn became a planetary event. By planetary, we mean literally everyone showed up. Businesses closed, schools cancelled lessons. The Ministry of Relaxation, which had never been particularly active, declared a national flex day. A stage was erected. Lights were mounted. A fog machine was tested but immediately dismantled after it made several Yibbles weep from excitement. Blort entered shirtless. Not out of bravado, but because his arms had grown too thick for his ceremonial leisure robe. Klarn entered chewing a raw protein cube, which no one had eaten before because, well, it wasn't edible. The squat rack stood between them, like a relic from some ancient war-torn myth, which was impressive, considering it had only existed for 6 days. A referee was appointed, Glarnetta, a librarian with a whistle and a highly flexible moral compass. She flipped a coin. It landed on its edge, a good omen according to absolutely no one. Blort went first. He squatted. The crowd gasped, not because the squat was good, but because his quadriceps made a sound. A deep, ancient creaking, like a ship groaning under celestial pressure. Klarn followed with a squat so low it cracked a paving tile and 3 belief systems. Somewhere in the audience, a Yibble fainted from sheer admiration. Another fainted just because it seemed like the right thing to do. Then Blort added weight. Then Klarn added more. Then someone added a boulder, and Glanetta finally screamed, "Enough! You're squatting metaphors now!" The duel ended not with a winner, but with both competitors stuck at the bottom of their final reps, grunting in what scholars later classified as the first mutual respect grunt. Something strange happened afterward. No one left. The crowd stayed. They began reenacting the squats, not just copying, but interpreting them. Some did them rhythmically. Some cried while squatting. One Yibble claimed to see the face of the universe in a deadlift and started painting his emotions with his calves. It was the start of what historians would later call the collective endorphin event. Yibbles, previously known for hobbies like contemplative cloud watching and the fine art of not doing much, were now addicted to movement. They loved it. They didn't know why. They didn't care. Muscles were now sacred. Effort was holy. Sweat was currency. Whole villages became exercise cults. One group moved into the forest and declared all trees nature's pull-up bars. Another group began chanting core, core, core in synchronized leg lifts around the central fountain. The government tried to intervene. Unfortunately, most of the council members had already joined a Zumba-fueled militia called the Cardio Collective. It got worse. In the town of Plibbleton, a Yibble lifted a log with such intensity that his veins briefly formed the word growth in cursive. Nobody could explain it. A pilgrimage began to that very log. It is still worshipped today. Even the elderly, once the keepers of Yibblecalm, got caught up in the madness. Granny Marnot, age 114, started teaching a class called Yoga for Warriors, which mostly involved glaring at people until they achieved better posture. This was no longer fitness. This was a movement, and at the center of it all, Blort and Clan, now best frenemies, led the charge. They started giving motivational speeches that made absolutely no sense, but caused spontaneous flexing across city squares. "The glute is a metaphor for life," shouted Blort. "Sweat is just fat crying with ambition," screamed Clan. Every Yibble nodded solemnly, except for one. A lone, bookish Yibble named Drod, who sat in the shade, sipping a cold chamomile fizz, and whispered to no one in particular, "They've all gone mad." But no one heard him. They were too busy doing burpees in honor of the moon. It was bound to happen. Everyone could feel it, like an itch in the collective conscience or a dumbbell balancing too close to the edge of sanity. The tension wasn't political. It wasn't ideological. It was form-related, specifically abdominals. Yibble society up to that point had been ruled by consensus, committees, hugs, thoughtful pauses. But now they debated core engagement angles with the fury of caffeinated philosophers in a wind tunnel. It started in the Temple of Tone, a formerly abandoned rec center now consecrated as holy ground for gains. Yibbles gathered there to discuss training, swap way-derived wisdom, and stare solemnly at their reflections until they had deep, reflective crises about triceps. On the third Thursday of the second muscle moon, something snapped. Jan, an ex-poet turned upper body specialist, was leading a workshop on mindful crunches. His technique involved slow, melodic contractions with whispered affirmations like, "I am my six-pack and pain is my plankmate." Across the mat stood Dreb, founder of the controversial explosive core detonation protocol, which mainly consisted of flailing violently until someone fainted or vomited from admiration. Dreb watched Jan's smooth meditative curls and made a sound that should never come out of a sentient being's face. It was a scoff, a loud one. The entire room froze. Jan slowly uncurled, his spine radiating judgment. "Do you question my tempo?" he asked, voice low and terrifyingly centered. Dreb stepped forward, sweaty, twitching slightly, pupils dilated with too much pre-workout. "I question everything, Jan, especially your core integrity." A gasp. No, a wave of gasps. It was like a stadium full of tea kettles going off at once. Someone dropped a kettlebell in shock. Someone else fainted onto a resistance mat and whispered, "Tell my quads, I love them." Jan stood, flexed, Dreb snarled, twitched. Then, with all the grace of a collapsing protein pancake, Dreb punched Jan square in the pectorals. The world ended, or at least Flan's tranquility rating dropped from celestial harmony to mildly alarmed ferret. Jan didn't punch back. He just stared, slowly rubbed his chest and said the phrase that would become the anthem of an entire era. "Oh, it's on now." And then he tackled Dreb into a stack of foam rollers. Chaos. Some tried to break it up using yoga blocks. Others used words. Someone threw a scented candle. Nothing worked. Yibbles began choosing sides. Not by logic, but by proximity, costume color, or who had better delts. The fight spread. Within an hour, every major fitness sect on the planet was engaged in an all-out conflict. The Pilates purists clashed with the Hit Hive. The Swole sisters arm-wrestled the Zen men. Even the elderly formed a rogue battalion called Silver Rage, led by Granny Marnet and her titanium walking staff of doom. But, and this is crucial, no one knew what they were fighting for anymore. There were chants, there were lunges, there were inexplicable burpees mid-brawl. The Temple of Tone collapsed under the weight of too much ego and one very ill-placed rowing machine. It wasn't war, not officially, but it was close. There were no casualties, only sprains, dramatic limp-offs, and one case of overly symmetrical glutes leading to existential despair. And in the middle of it all, watching from the shadowy corner of a protein bar stand, was Drod, still sipping chamomile fizz, still unimpressed. "They'll destroy the planet with dumbbells before they even discover chess," he muttered, and with that he quietly scribbled a note. "Request immediate intervention, preferably intelligent, definitely not muscular." He folded it, strapped it to a homing squirrel, and let it go. The Grand Council of Yibble Elders met for the first time in 50 years. They dusted off the circle of thought cushions, lit the incense of calm, which made everyone sneeze, and prepared to address the crisis now being called the Flexident. The room was tense. Well, as tense as it could be when half the elders were still wearing yoga socks and sipping protein tea. The floor was open to suggestions. "Ban dumbbells," croaked Elder Plern. "They are clearly the source of all ambition." "Confiscate resistance bands," argued Lady Marie. "They're far too springy." "Inspire rebellion. We should embrace the chaos," shouted Elder Vlam, who had recently developed calves so large they had their own zip code. Eventually, after 3 hours of debate and one accidental group hug, they reached a consensus. They would build a peacekeeping force, a pacifist militia. It sounded ridiculous, because it was. The name they chose was the Harmonizers. They wore lavender armor, woven from recycled meditation mats. Their weapons were long staffs carved from bamboo and positive intentions. Their war cry was "Relax," shouted in 4-part harmony. Their training manual included deep breathing, persuasive conflict de-escalation chants, and the ability to bench press emotional baggage. They marched, not in formation but in gentle, interpretive dance steps, into the heart of the chaos, determined to restore balance. Their first encounter with the resistance was in Plibbleton, now a fortified fitness compound guarded by the cult of maximal burn. Their leader, Flexor Dan, had replaced all doorways with squat stations. Entry required 2 perfect reps and a scream of personal triumph. The Harmonizers approached peacefully. "Lay down your kettlebells," said Captain Glue, voice trembling but hopeful. Flexor Dan flexed his pectorals so aggressively it knocked 2 banners off the wall. "Or what?" he grinned. Glue swallowed. "Or we shall meditate, aggressively, in your presence." The battle was brief and stupid. Foam mats flew like frisbees. Resistance bands snapped with the force of angry violin strings. At one point, a harmonizer attempted to disarm an opponent by quoting a motivational calendar. They were, predictably, destroyed, but in the most polite way imaginable. Flexor Dan offered them protein bars and a stretching room after the fight. It was less a battle, and more an unusually energetic book club falling apart over kettlebell philosophy. Word of the harmonizers' defeat spread fast. The council panicked. They declared a state of moderate disruption, and then, in total desperation, opened a forbidden protocol hidden in the deepest archives. Contact external entity Homo sapiens. Back in Flan, Drod's homing squirrel had returned, with a message from Earth, short, direct, and terrifying. We're sending help. 10 hours later, a small transport shuttle broke through Klubo 3's pristine atmosphere. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't high-tech, it wasn't even particularly symmetrical, but it was loud, very loud. The doors hissed open. Out stepped a man, large, grizzled, wearing shorts that defied time and taste, muscles that had seen things, eyes that had watched too many bad action movies. He dropped a duffel bag. It thudded. Hard. A protein shaker rolled out. Then came the voice. Low, calm, lethally cheerful. Name's Hank, he said. Hank Wobble. He cracked his neck, looked around at the protein-coated madness, and smiled. Let's clean up this mess. Hank Wobble was not born. He was probably constructed in a forgotten corner of a gym locker room, forged from surplus creatine and motivational tapes from the early 2000s. He didn't walk. He strode, like a man who considered stairs a personal insult and treadmills an acceptable form of small talk. The Yibbles stared at him like he was a prophecy that had just bench-pressed itself into reality. He smelled like effort, not sweat. Effort, a scent brewed from ancient locker rooms, melted ambition, and protein powder that had never been properly mixed. All right, he said, setting up a portable squat rack made entirely of regret and chrome. Who's in charge of this cardio cult circus? A dozen Yibbles pointed in 12 different directions. Hank nodded. So, all of you. Great. He toured the chaos personally. He observed the squadrons of spandexed revolutionaries curling things they had no business lifting. Street signs, furniture, livestock. He watched the elders in their harmonizer robes, meditating furiously in a crater. He nodded politely at a child doing battle ropes with 2 snakes. Then, without fanfare, he entered the remains of the Temple of Tone and reopened the gym. No speeches, no threats, just action. Weights were reorganized. Mats were disinfected with something that hissed like a wounded lizard. He installed a speaker system that played a continuous loop of vintage workout anthems mixed with gentle insults. The Yibbles watched, confused. Some approached. Blort first. He squinted at Hank, unsure whether to challenge him or ask for an autograph. I was the first, Blort said, puffing out his chest. I curled before it was cool. Hank handed him a kettlebell the size of a small moonfruit. Do it again, he replied. Blort tried. He screamed, pulled something he didn't know he had, collapsed in ecstasy. Beautiful, Hank muttered. Now go drink water, like a champion. Then came Clarn, who tried to show off with a high-speed plank maneuver that ended in a deeply undignified faceplant. Hank didn't laugh. He nodded. Form's a little off, but I like the spirit. Let's shape it before it snaps something. Word spread. Fast. Within hours, Yibbles were flocking to the gym again, but this time under structure. Hank instituted something called the program, a mysterious regime of lifting, lunging, laughing, and long lectures about electrolytes. And then he brought out the whiteboard. On it, he wrote in giant, terrifying letters, Tournament. The Yibbles screamed, some from fear, some from excitement, some because someone had dropped a barbell on a tail. A challenge, Hank explained, to settle all this absurdity. Winner gets bragging rights, losers get stronger. Everyone stops turning every public fountain into a glute activation station. It worked. Sort of. Some sects were suspicious. The Pilates purists demanded separate scoring for fluidity. The Hit Hive insisted on surprise attacks mid-event. The Silver Rage wanted nap breaks. Hank accepted everything. Fine, he said, we'll score on pain, passion, posture, and poetry. Poetry? Asked a confused Yibble. You ever done a deadlift so perfect it made you cry? Hank said, eyes misty. Nobody argued. The tournament was scheduled for the next day, planet-wide, all styles, all skills, one arena, one chance to finally figure out what in the name of sweaty enlightenment was going on. Hank cracked his knuckles, rolled his neck, and whispered to himself, time to show them what humans do best. The Klubo Arena was never meant to exist. It was built overnight using repurposed bleachers, recycled ambition, and 137,000 protein bars melted together as glue. It echoed with anticipation and also questionable acoustics due to poor roof design and an over-enthusiastic choir that had already started singing about hamstrings. Every sect arrived in full form, the Hit Hive in neon helmets, the Zen men floating slightly, the Swole sisters carried in on stretchers, voluntarily. Silver Rage showed up late, but blamed time dilation and arthritis. Hank Wobble stood at the center. He wore sunglasses indoors. He also wore a tank top with the phrase, lift or leave, written in ancient gym script. Here's how it works, he announced. You compete, you grunt, you maybe cry a little. Whoever impresses me the most wins. The rest get my respect, which frankly is worth more than your internal organs at this point. Round 1, deadlift diplomacy. Each competitor had to lift something meaningful. Blort chose a statue of his former self, soft, wide-eyed, naive. He lifted it with a quiet growl and one emotional tear. Round 2, battle burpees. A chaotic blur of flailing, falling, rising and slapping the ground with existential rage. Klan did 30, backwards, while yelling, "Who am I?" Round 3, emotional cardio. Each sect performed a dance routine representing their journey. The Swole sisters twerked about betrayal. The Zen men slow motion lunged through enlightenment. Silver Rage performed a waltz of suppressed fury that made 3 judges weep openly. Hank watched it all, stone-faced, until round 4, the freestyle showdown. Blort stepped forward, muscles tight, eyes determined. He performed an interpretive bench press sequence that told the story of Klubo's rise from passivity to powerful absurdity. It ended with him cradling a kettlebell like a child, whispering, "I understand now." The arena fell silent. Even Hank blinked. Then Klan entered. No theatrics, just silence. He stepped to the center, lifted Blort's emotional kettlebell, and threw it into orbit. "Let the galaxy decide," he roared. The crowd exploded. Literally, someone had brought fireworks. Hank raised a hand. Enough. The dust settled. The applause faded. The protein bar vendor passed out from overselling. He turned to Blort and Klan. "You two," he said, "you've shown everything that matters. Power, pain, profound confusion. A pause, but also balance. And unfiltered ridiculousness." He pulled out 2 medals shaped like biceps, held them up, and then tossed them into the crowd. "No winners!" he shouted. "Only stronger losers!" The crowd cheered, because somehow that made sense now. And with that, Hank Wobble packed his duffel bag, flexed once for tradition, and boarded his shuttle. He didn't say goodbye. He just left a note. Keep lifting, but maybe cool it with the cults. The Yibbles did not return to who they were. Not entirely. They were still Yibbles, still round, still squeaky. But now they occasionally did squats while negotiating treaties. Their schools included philosophy of flex, and their calendar was reset. Everything before the gym was now called pre-gain era. Drod, of course, never touched a dumbbell, but he did start a podcast called Planet of Lunatics, which became wildly popular across 4 systems. And far, far away, in a very tired corner of the galaxy, someone misdelivered another crate labeled Advanced Human Combat Yoga Studio. So yes, somewhere out there, the madness continues.